There's a story America has been quietly avoiding for over 2 centuries. And once you hear it, you'll never look at this country's founding the same way again. We talk about Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, men whose faces appear on currency, monuments, and textbook covers. But there were other men, black men, men who bled for this country before it even decided whether people who look like them deserve to be called human. These are their stories, and they deserve to be told. Let's start with someone whose name almost nobody learns in school, Crispus Attucks. Born around 1723, he was likely a man of African and Native American descent who had escaped enslavement and spent years working as a sailor and rope maker in Boston. On March 5th, 1770, he walked into history. When British soldiers opened fire on a crowd of colonial protesters, Attucks was the first to fall. The first person killed in what we now call the Boston Massacre, the very first death in the chain of events that would eventually lead to American independence. The revolution didn't start with wealthy white landowners in powdered wigs. It started with a black man on a cobblestone street refusing to back down. Now, here's where this gets even deeper. Tens of thousands of black men fought in the Revolutionary War. Some fought on the American side, hoping that liberty wasn't just a word white men used for themselves. Others fought for the British, who had promised freedom to enslaved people who joined their cause. Either way, black men were literally shaping the battlefield outcomes of a war whose ideals they had every reason to distrust. Peter Salem is another name history buried. At the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775, Salem is widely credited with shooting British Major John Pitcairn, whose death turned the tide of that critical engagement. Paintings commemorating Bunker Hill exist. Salem himself appears in at least one of them, though you really have to look. He fought throughout the war, served at Saratoga, at Stony Point, and still returned to a country that viewed him as property rather than a patriot. Then there was James Armistead Lafayette. This man was a spy, an actual sophisticated intelligence operative working behind British lines during the war. He gained the trust of British General Cornwallis himself, feeding false information back to the British while delivering real intelligence to the American side. Historians argue his contributions directly helped make the decisive American victory at Yorktown possible. Without Yorktown, there may have been no United States. Armistead did this as an enslaved man. He was so effective that he eventually earned his freedom and took the last name Lafayette in honor of the French general he served under. And we need to talk about Wentworth Cheswell. Here's a man who was the first African-American elected to public office in United States history, winning a local election in New Hampshire in 1768. He was a soldier, a historian, an archaeologist of sorts, and a community leader who served his town for decades. He also rode north on the same night Paul Revere rode west, warning communities that the British were coming. 2 riders. One gets a famous poem, one gets forgotten. The deeper question isn't just about credit, it's about what happens to a nation's identity when it deliberately erases the people who helped build it. When you remove black contributions from the founding story, you create a false mythology. That mythology then becomes the justification for treating black Americans as outsiders in a country their ancestors literally died to create. And here's the psychological trap that erasure sets. If you grow up believing that freedom and democracy were gifts handed down exclusively by white founders, then equality feels like generosity, like something that gets granted. But when you understand the real history, you realize equality was never a gift. It was always a debt. These men, Attucks, Salem, Armistead, Cheswell, and hundreds more, didn't just contribute to America, they were foundational to it. Their courage, their sacrifice, their intelligence, and their blood are woven into the fabric of this nation just as deeply as anyone whose face ended up on a coin. The fact that we don't know their names isn't an accident. Erasure is always intentional. And recovering that history is not about guilt or politics. It's about accuracy. It's about finally telling the complete story of where this country actually came from. So the next time someone asks what it means to be American, remember that the answer is bigger and more complicated and far more powerful than any dollar bill can contain. These men built something. It's time we said their names. Drop a comment below with the name that hit you hardest. And if this history matters to you, share this video. Because the only way to fix erasure is to refuse to participate in it.